message is, are we on? Good. This message will be rated R, so I just want to put that out there right up front. So if you often have younger kids tuning in, you know, if they're under 13, 14, I say rated R. Rated R is what, 17 up, you know. This is going to be an adult message. So if you've got teens or young people that have sensitive ears, or they may struggle with some of these adult subjects, this would be the time to tune out. And this is one of those passages of the Bible that it is better to come back to later when you're a little bit older. So we're finishing up the book of Judges tonight. So join me in Judges chapter 19. The last 3 chapters of the book of Judges is one story. It's one story. It's a story of a Levite and his concubine. You know, that's like a legalized mistress, right? It's like an ancient custom to be able to sleep around on the side and act like it was okay. That's what a concubine is, right? So Judges chapter 19 opens up with this story of this Levite who had a concubine, and it leads into the next chapter or two, chapter 20 being the results of what happened in chapter 19. Some horrible things are going to happen in chapter 19. Chapter 20 is a civil war because of what happens in chapter 19. And then chapter 20 then finishes up the story of now having to fix the problems from what they caused in the war, because they dealt with things in such an unjust fashion. So what's the theme of the book of Judges, class? Come on, what is it? Everybody did right in their own eyes. And I want you to hear 2 parts when you hear this, at least 2 parts. Everyone was doing what they wanted to do. You need to hear that they didn't look to the Lord, they looked to themselves. The other thing I want you to hear in that expression is they thought it was right. Very often, the people in Israel were thinking they were doing righteousness. They were on the right side of things. Have you ever felt that way about yourself? Where, well, my sin, here's the reasons why I do these sins, but their sin is heinous. You ever felt like that? You ever thought that way? That's part of the expression that it was right in their own eyes. They were doing what they thought was right. They were okay with the sins that they were allowing, but the sins that other people did, oh, that's horrible. I don't want to be like them. They won't. You're going to see tonight that these certain Israelite, he won't even go to one of the Canaanite cities in the land. It was Jerusalem, actually, when it was still controlled by the Jebusites. He wouldn't even go there because, oh, they're horrible. Now me, I'm great. And that's often how we think. These 3 chapters is the story of what happens to this Levite, his concubine, and then a civil war breaks out, literally, because of what happens in chapter 19. So everyone's doing what they think is right. So remember that the book of Judges, we looked at all of these major judges in order through chapter 16. Chapter 17 to the end of the book, then, it presents really an appendix to the book. So it's not in chronological order. So these last chapters from the last session, we looked at 17 and 18, and then also tonight, 19, 20, 21, these are not chronologically at the end of the period of Judges. It's not. It's a fill in the blank. We back up. In fact, these stories tonight are going to tell us that they happened very early on in the period of Judges, because it'll name the fact that Phinehas, high priest Aaron, his grandson, is still the high priest during this time. So these stories tonight happen early on in the period of the Judges. But the reason this appendix is here from chapter 17 through the end of the book is because it sets the stage with describing in great detail the absolute moral decay of this time period. It gives you the surrounding culture to remember while you're reading the stories in the book of Judges. This is the backdrop. This is the culture that's been developing for hundreds of years while everyone is doing what they think is right, independent of God. And so this sets the culture, okay? But remember, it's also possible, Christian, to live godly in Christ Jesus through a horrible culture around you. We're going to touch on at the end of the story tonight, stay tuned for this, a very important special couple that lived during this time period of the Judges, and they lived in a pleasing way to God. And we'll touch on that as we get towards the end. So remember that. This just really sets up the fact that the character of this time period of the judges was wicked. And they thought it was right. They thought it was good. When you ignore King Jesus, you have no compass to truly declare what is right and what is wrong. What you think is right ends up being right. When you throw out God, your next obvious God to listen to is your own opinion. And that's what they're going to be doing tonight. So you got to keep that in mind as we read about each of the people in the story tonight. We're going to read about this Levite. We're going to read about his concubine. We're going to read about an old man that helps them. We're going to read about members of different tribes, and every one of them has their own opinion of what is right and what direction they should go. The only problem with doing what's right in your own eyes is when right in your eyes conflicts with what's right in their eyes. Then who's right? There's constant conflict when we're doing what's right in our own eyes. You ever thought about that? We think to ourselves, well, I'm doing what I think is right. Well, what if the next person comes up next to you and says, well, I'm doing what I think is right, and it disagrees with you? There's a conflict. There's constant conflict when we're doing what we think is right. We need to go higher than that and go to the source and find out what God says is right. So these 3 chapters are going to be absolute moral depravity. But what can we do about it? How can we take lessons from this? That's what I want to do tonight, guys. I want to take away 3 lessons about how we can live in an environment like that. Through absolute moral depravity and decay, let's learn some lessons tonight, okay? Chapter 19, looking at chapter 19 will give us the first lesson, okay? Chapter 19, here's the first lesson we're going to learn from living through moral decay. We can't side with evil and expect not to be bitten by it. I think I'm maybe mixing my metaphors there, but you get the point. You can't agree with evil and evil things and evil people and expect not to have that same evil come affect you. When you surround yourself with the evil, it's going to eventually affect you. And that's the lesson I want you to take away from chapter 19, okay? Let's dive into this story here of this Levite and his concubine in Judges chapter 19, and let's go from there. All right? I was in Joshua 19. That's not going to do me any good. Judges 19. All right. Remember, this chapter will set the stage for the civil war in Israel that you'll see in chapter 20. So chapter 19, verse 1, it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, have you heard that before? That there was a certain Levite who sojourned on the side of Mount Ephraim, and he took to him a concubine out of the city of Bethlehem, Judah. It was really a village. Bethlehem was small at this time. It just calls it Bethlehem, Judah, because remember that there was another Bethlehem up north in Zebulun. So this is just describing that it's the Bethlehem that we know of that will later be the birthplace of Jesus. In verse 2, his concubine played the whore against him and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there for 4 months. So verse 3, her husband arose and he went after her to speak friendly unto her and to bring her again. Having his servant with him and a couple of donkeys, she brought him unto her father's house, and when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. And his father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him, and he abode with him for 3 days. So they did eat and drink, and he lodged there. So again, a concubine was a lot like a legal mistress, right? This was a way, I mean, isn't that funny how some people think it's like such a trendy thing? It's so modern, to have a girl on the side. Like, yeah, we're just sleeping around. We're just enjoying all the fringe benefits. People think it's so, hip and modern and cool. It's been around for generations. It's been around since the beginning of time that people wanted to go get sex on the side and act like it was some brazen, cool, amazing thing that they can get away with and have this great high, this great buzz out of doing this on the side. It's been around forever. So stop acting like you're cool. It's not. It's just a sin. It's just disgusting. All it is having sex without commitment. That's all it is. When you don't have a full relationship with the one that you're with, you're joining physically two into one, and you're unwilling to even join mentally into one with the person, let alone spiritually come together as one. I mean, the whole idea of the hookup culture, I just want to physically be together, have sex some night, and that's it. That's all you get. I mean, it's selfish is all it is. So a concubine, a legal mistress, right? Okay. There's so many habits of sin here. I won't necessarily go through them all. But number one, the Levites, the priestly tribe of the Levites, they were supposed to represent God. And here we have a Levite with a concubine on the side that he's not even married to. I mean, later when it calls the girl's father, his father-in-law, it just know that it's not saying that they're married. This is just the term that would have been used for any type of relationship. And so they're not married. In fact, I mean, she leaves him even. She left him and went home for 4 months. And she's out, and it said in verse 1 or 2, what was it? In verse 2, that the concubine went out and she was sleeping around on him. So here you got this Levite who picks up a concubine on the side, picks up a girl on the side just so he could sleep around and have sex with her. And that's all he was interested in. So guess what she does? She does it right back to him. And so just like all these couples today, now she's mad at him and she goes back home. But after a period of time, he wants to reconcile. He remembers how good it was. And so they want to get back together. So he goes to her house so that they can get back together. But what is he interested in? I mean, so far, all we know of the story is that he's interested in the sex, but no commitment. Now, again, I want you to not miss the fact in verse 1, it points out that this was a time period when there was no king in Israel. That will allow you to be able to do what's right in your own eyes, right? Imagine 1 week, imagine Chambersburg, 1 week of Chambersburg with no king, with no law enforcement. No law enforcement for a week. And everybody knows it in town. I don't mean a situation where people still think that there's cops. People still think you can get arrested. I mean, imagine 1 week where everybody knows there are no cops. Have you seen the movie The Purge, right? That is exactly what that movie's all about, is that there's a time, I think it's like, an hour a night or an hour a week or something where there's no law enforcement. You can do literally whatever you want and you can't get arrested. And it's an hour of death. I mean, everybody just goes out murdering each other and stealing whatever they want. That's what it's like to have no king and to live by what you think is right. It leads to complete selfishness, and you do whatever you want. So here's this Levite getting a concubine, doing what he wants, what he thinks is right, and she goes out and sleeping around with other guys herself, doing it right back to him. The whole thing is completely selfish. Isn't that, I mean, just break it down to a base level. You think he's going out thinking to himself, well, maybe she's going to cheat around on me. Probably. I mean, that's how people are today. That's why people are afraid of commitment today, because they think the moment I get connected to somebody, they're going to break it off and they're going to be not connected to me. There's no commitment. There's no relationship today because everybody's worried that the other person's going to flake out. And we need to break that as the church. The church should say, we're in it to get married for life. We're going to do it right. And so we can build the commitment. We can build the trust. Verse 5. So here he is at his father-in-law's house. They're making up together. And in verse 5, it came to pass on the 4th day. So now this father-in-law, the concubine's father, has kept him there for 4 days, eating and drinking and having a good time. And on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart, the damsel's father said to the son-in-law, comfort thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterwards then you can go. And they sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together. For the damsel's father had said unto the man, be content, I pray thee, and stay here all night until your heart is merry. Whether they were getting drunk or not, it's not really in the text. Verse 7, and when the man arose up to depart, his father-in-law urged him. Therefore he lodged there again. And in verse 8, he arose up early in the morning on the 5th day to depart. And the damsel's father said, comfort your heart, I pray thee. And they tarried until the afternoon on the 5th day. And they did eat, both of them. So it's the middle of the 5th day now. And in verse 9, when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said to him, behold, the day draweth towards evening. I pray you, tarry all night. Behold, the day groweth to an end. Stay here, that thine heart may be merry. And tomorrow get you up early on your way, that you may go home. And in verse 10, the man would not stay that night, but he arose up and he departed, and he came over against Jebus. Now, Jebus was literally, this is Jerusalem. Jerusalem is up in the hill, okay? Remember that Israel never conquered Jebus yet. They've never taken the city. It's named Jebus because the Canaanite people called the Jebusites still run it. So it's called Jebus. And so it says here in verse 10 that he rose up, he departed, he came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem. It will be Jerusalem later. And there were with him the 2 asses saddled. His concubine was also with him. You got to love the King James. Oh, yeah, and she was there too, right? And so they're going along, and they left in the middle of the day in the afternoon. Guys, they only have a few hours before it's dark. You don't travel after dark back then. It's not safe. It's not safe. You can get mugged, robbed, killed, and nobody's going to know the difference. So the father-in-law was clearly trying to keep this guy around. There's no real indication of why, other than everybody made up and he was trying to keep him there. The point is, with all of the good time, drinking, partying, eating, getting full, he left late in the afternoon, and that's going to cause the problem that we're going to see next. All right, so verse 11 now draws out what the problem is. When they were by Jebus, which is Jerusalem, the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, because remember he had a servant with him, "Come, I pray thee, and let us turn into this city of the Jebusites and stay here." And his master said to him, "We will not turn aside here into this city of a stranger," meaning not Israelites. That is, oh, there it even says it. That is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. So this Levite says, I am not going to stay overnight in a Canaanite city. I won't do it. You know, the indication there is we're better than them. There's no way I would take lodge in a place like that. It's not an indication of, well, I don't feel safe there. It's an indication of I'm better than them and I'm not going to stay with them. And so he won't turn into this city. Isn't that interesting, though, how other people's sins and vices seem so much worse than our own? He's in a situation where now they're going to be traveling in dark. They would rather do that than take up foreigners' hospitality. That's how much he's repulsed by their sin. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't be repulsed by others' sin, but what about his own? I mean, this man is clearly living a life of sin himself. Weren't you ever told, I don't smoke, drink, cuss, or chew, or hang around with girls that do? I mean, he's doing all of the above and hanging out with girls that do, okay? And yet he's worried about turning into a city that's a foreigner just because, well, I don't know, those stinking foreigners, that kind of thing. Really? Oh, come on. I know people that won't stop at certain hotels at night. Because, I know that hotel, that's run by da-da-da whoever. Really? I mean, what prejudice? And sometimes it's not even because of sin, it's just because they have a bias, a prejudice against somebody. How sad. How sad. Verse 13. So he wants to keep going past Jerusalem to Gibeah. And in verse 13, he said unto his servant, "Come, and let us draw near to one of these places to lodge all night in Gibeah, or maybe in Ramah." Ramah was just a little village outside of Gibeah. And they passed, in verse 14, they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. And in verse 15, they turned aside thither, gotta love the King's English, to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the street of the city, for there was no man that took him into his house for lodging. This was the common hospitality of the day. When visitors, they didn't have hotels, right? There wasn't a single hotel. That's not the way it worked. The culture was, when a visitor showed up, they would present themselves in the gate of the city. And then people passing by would be like, "You're not from around here. Do you have a place yet?" Okay, come with me then. That's just what you did. You didn't have to know them. You didn't have to know what tribe they're from. It didn't matter. There they are in the gate. They're waiting for a place to stay. You took them. That's what you do. Okay? He's in the gate, and the end of verse 15 says, nobody took him in. Even that demonstrates how far the nation had fallen, where even the common hospitalities, the simple kindnesses, the general courtesies are gone. And don't you still see that today? In so many ways, you see that today. I was taught that when you pass somebody like on the sidewalk, or if you pass somebody going down a long hall, you make eye contact, you say, hey, how you doing? Friendly smile. The simple kindnesses aren't even there. And this is the whole city of Gibeah. Nobody's inviting them in, right? Verse 16. And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at the evening, which was also of Mount Ephraim. Now remember, they're in a city, Gibeah, which is inside of the tribe of Benjamin. Okay? This Levite is from the tribe of Ephraim. This old man is from the tribe of Ephraim, and they're both here in this city of Benjamin. Okay? So they're both sort of visitors to this area, although the old man has work that he's doing there, so he has a place where he's staying. So this old man in verse 16 came out of the field. He was also of Ephraim, and he sojourned in Gibeah. But the men of the place were Benjamites. And in verse 17, when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street. That's the Levite we're talking about. And the old man said, where do you go, and where did you come from? And he said to him, we're passing from Bethlehem, Judah, towards the side of Mount Ephraim. That's where I'm from. And I went down to Bethlehem, Judah. But I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is nobody that's taken me into the house. And in verse 19, yet now the Levite says, yet there is both straw and provender here for our asses, and there is bread and wine also for me, and for thy handmaiden, and for the young man which is with thy servants. There's no want of anything. So the Levite says to this old man, well, somebody came by and gave us some bread and food for the donkeys and stuff. We're okay. We'll just sleep out on the street tonight. And in verse 20, the old man says, peace be upon you. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, only don't stay here in the street. So the old man invites him in. Come stay with me tonight. Just don't stay in the street, which is very interesting, because based on what happens in this story, you wonder if maybe the old man had an indication that if he stayed on the street, wicked things were going to happen. So the old man invites him to come to his place where he's staying. So the old man's not from this city. He's there working, and he has a place to stay while he's there working. He probably has an indication of how wicked the people of Gibeah really are. And now let's pick it up in verse 21. So he brought him into his house, and he gave him provender for the asses, and they washed their feet, and they did eat and drink. Now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial. It just means worthless people. That's what it means. It means people of no value. I mean, how bad do you have to be so that the word of God refers to you as a worthless person? Really? You have reached the depths of depravity when the scripture refers to you that way. So certain sons of Belial beset the house round about, and they beat at the door, and they spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into your house, that we may know him. And that literally means that we may have sexual intercourse with the man. All right? I did warn you, this message is rated R, okay? That's what they're saying. These people saw the Levite coming to visit. Oh, the old man took him in down the road. Let's go get him. Let's go get him. In verse 23, the old man, the master of the house, went out unto them, and he said to them, no, my brethren, no, I pray you, don't do this wickedness. Seeing that this man is come into mine house, don't do this folly. In verse 24, behold, now the old man speaks and says his own form of wickedness. Behold, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now and humble you them. In other words, have them do whatever you want. Sexually, abuse them. Humble them and do what with them as seems good unto you. But unto this man, don't do so vile a thing. Now look, Remember that even in the customs of the day where you had to provide hospitality, that was a strong thing. The moment you picked somebody up in the gate and you said, stay with me tonight, you were obligated to protect them. That's an honorable thing, right? If you invite somebody to your house, you wouldn't, you'd put away the safety hazards, right? You'd fix things up. You want to take care of them, right? So this man is obligated to take care of his guest. But look how he takes his obligation to do something good and honorable to a sinful degree. He says, oh, I won't let you have the guest, but these women, even my own daughter, I will turn them over to you to do whatever you want. This is twisted. You see how this brings to light the idea that I've been saying, and even in introduction where we said everybody's doing that which is right in their own eyes. It's not just that they're doing what is separate from God. It's that they think what they're doing is good and honorable. You can't please God by doing dishonorable, ungodly things to meet a godly goal. It doesn't work that way. You can't go out and steal from the bank and bring the money to the church and say, I'm helping the church. It's a godly thing. Yeah, but you stole it. It doesn't belong to you, let alone the church. And this is the idea. You don't have to go to sinful means to advance good things or God's will. And yet when you're doing what is right in your own eyes, you think you have to. You think, well, I have to do whatever it takes. No, you don't. That's pragmatism. The Bible never endorses pragmatism. Just do whatever it takes to have a good outcome. There, I protected my guest. No, it doesn't say that at all. This man should have, when they're beating on the door, you know what he should have done? Instead of saying, here's my daughter, do whatever you want with her. Here's the concubine, take her out into the street. He should have said, God, I remember what you did at Sodom. God, you used your divine messengers to blind those sinners to keep them away. God, would you do it again? God, show yourself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are perfect towards you. Lord, I come to you. Fix this. Help me. None of that is here. None of that is here. He takes matters into his own hands, into his own sinful ways, and turns these girls out. Talk about a low view of women. Another indication of the absolute moral depravity that we see right here. Think about this. The very sins that were highlighted that the Levite and his concubine were involved in, him getting a girl on the side just for the pleasure, her going out and cheating on him just for the pleasure, these very sexual sins are coming back to bite them. It's the whole thing. One plays on the other, plays on the other, plays on the other. You get involved with sin, you get involved with sinners, you keep going, it's got to come back. It's all around you now. You can't, in the New Testament, think about this in the New Testament. Do you remember this? We just did this recently. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Do you remember this? It talks about how when an unbeliever is married to a believer, it says, believer, don't depart from that marriage. Don't feel like, well, you're married to an unbeliever, I have to get rid of him. No. It says, don't depart. It says, be with them. And it even says, lest your children be unclean. You have a purifying effect on them. We Christians, you're doing more in the environment that you're in than you think you are. You're having an effect. If you weren't there, it would run nuts. It would go crazy. The Lord needs you where you are. Keep being salt and light. Because when you're not, when you're doing what you want, the sin is everywhere. And this is what you have. One does their thing, what they think is right. The other does what they think is right. And then it keeps going. And it's a horrible situation. Verse 25, this is the depths of the depravity. Verse 25, but the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them, and they slept with her, and they abused her. They knew her. It's not just that they raped her. This is a horrible situation, turning her out into the street. And they abused her all night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. This wasn't like 5 minutes. It was the whole night. In verse 26, then came the woman in the dawning of the day, and she fell down at the door of the man's house where her Lord was till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning. Hope he slept well. Your little woman's out there in the street all night being raped. How well did you sleep? Just that he rose up in the morning is enough to infuriate you, isn't it? That he didn't even try to do anything about this. He rose up in the morning and he opened the doors of the house and he went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house and her hands were upon the threshold. And he said to her, "Up, let us get going." But none answered, because she was dead. Then the man took her up upon his ass, and the man rose up and he got him to his place. What abuse. What abuse. There was no answer because she died through all of the abuse. And that's how bad this was. I mean, there's a certain amount of beating just to be able to rape somebody. And then she's this bad off, she actually dies by the morning. Where's this guy's compassion? Christianity has elevated women to the place of beauty, a place of equality. Different roles, we get it, but equality with men. You should never in Christianity find a situation where a man says, "Well, you can't have this guy, but here, just take these girls and get out of here." You would never have that. They have equal value as men do, right? You remember Galatians? Paul said in Galatians chapter 3, speaking of how we've put on Christ. As Christians, we have the mind of Christ. And then he says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Jesus Christ." See, when you stop following God, you're going to follow the culture. You're going to devalue women. You're going to treat them as sex slaves and objects of affection, as if that's all they have to offer is a body. And that's what happens when you stop following the Lord. But when you follow God, everybody has the same value. You're not less valuable than me because you have a different role than me. You're not less valuable than me because you have a different skin than me, or you're from a different place than me. None of us are valued less than the other. We're all created in the image of God with that type of beauty. And that is what that's what Jesus Christ brought to the world. And it is certainly not represented in a culture like this where everybody is doing that which is right in their own eyes. Many cultures today, still as a whole culture, evaluate women less than they evaluate guys. There's a reporter for Fox News, Laura Logan. You might know the name. She had been a reporter for CBS News for decades, I think. And the last bunch of years she's been with Fox News. But in 2011, she was famously covering the overthrow of the Mubarak administration in Egypt. And she had security with her and everything. And this is 2011, guys. This is 10 years ago, just recently. And there's a mob of people. And they started running towards them. I think estimates are between 80 and 200 people. Started running towards them. She eventually, her security said, "Don't fall down or you're done for." And so she did everything she could to stay on her feet, and the mob eventually caught up to them and abused her horribly. I mean, hours of a rape and abuse. And one of the absolutely perverse things about the whole thing is it was a celebration. All of those people were there to celebrate the Mubarak overthrow. Isn't that just disgusting? That in this frenzied excitement of celebrating a change of government, they take it upon themselves to do these horrible things to her and to others. I think that's it just draws you back to the same idea that we've been saying all through the book of Judges. That in the times of our most freedom, in the times of our biggest prosperity, freedom, and independence is when we are the most tempted to sin and do what we think is right in our own eyes. And she's in a lot of ways recovered from this, and she tells the story, and it just, what a reminder that there are still cultures today that treat women in this way, that's what they are. They're meant to be secondary citizens that are used for their body and for what they can give to a man. And it's so sad. It still happens all the time today. The sex trafficking industry, the human trafficking industry today, sad to say, is alive and well. I mean, there's the trial that's happening right now, Ghislaine Maxwell, the rich money people behind human trafficking in the world. It's sad. It's sad. So here this girl, because of this culture and the lifestyle that she's in, the sin that she's in, the sin that the country's in, the sin that the city is in, the sin of these people and these men, they abuse her horribly. And she dies. She dies in verse 28. Now, verse 29, when he was come to his house, so she's dead and now he's come back home, he took a knife and he laid hold on his concubine and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces. And he sent her pieces into all of the coasts of Israel. And it was so that all that saw it said was no such deed done since from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day. Consider of it. Take advice and speak your minds. So he's doing this as a call to action. The Levite literally splits her body into 12 pieces, sending a... I mean, somebody, you can't help but see a part of a human corpse and say, whoa, what happened here? What's going on? Why is this here? He's looking to spark the conscience in people, right? I pray that we always stay in a place where our hearts are sparked the moment we see sin. We don't need to have a big heinous sin show up in front of us before we go, whoa. I don't want to have a dead corpse show up in front of me before I go, whoa, what am I doing? Get away from me. I don't want to do that. I want to do something pleasing. But that's what he has to do. He has to chop up a dead body and send it around to get their attention. But did you notice how many pieces? 12 pieces? Because there's 12 tribes. Guess who is one of the 12 tribes that received this shock message? The tribe of Benjamin, where this happened at the city of Gibeah. So even the Benjamites are going to receive this opportunity to go, whoa, what is happening in our town of Gibeah? And so there's chapter 19, and that's really what sets up the civil war that comes now in chapter 20. So again, the first lesson I want you to see is you can't side with evil and expect not to be bitten. And now, number 2, I want you to see another lesson from moral decay, which is you can't remove cancer with an infected scalpel. It doesn't work. You can't do good. You can't help others. You can't enforce good if you're dirty. It doesn't work that way. And so that is what's going to try to happen now in chapter 20 as this civil war breaks out. Chapter 20. The children of Israel went out and the congregation was gathered together as one. From Dan to Beersheba, because remember now Dan is pictured as being up in the north and Beersheba is in the south. So anytime you see that expression from Dan to Beersheba, it's just saying everybody from the north to the south, the whole land was gathered together with the land of Gilead unto the Lord at the town of Mizpah. And they mention Gilead because Gilead was a big famous city on the east side of the Jordan that represented the people and the tribes of Israel that were over there. So everybody from Dan to Beersheba, even those on the other side of the river Jordan, came to Mizpah. And in verse 2, the chief of all the people, even of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves to the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 footmen that drew the sword. This is a national assembly just a few miles away in Mizpah from where this happened in Gibeah. They're not that far away, right down the road. Verse 3. Now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel were gone up to Mizpah. Then said the children of Israel, tell us, how was this wickedness? And now listen to the Levite recount the story of what happened. Verse 4. The Levite, the husband of the woman, but my concubine have they forced, that she is dead. And I took my concubine, and I cut her into pieces, and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed lewdness and folly in Israel. Behold, in verse 7, ye are all children of Israel, you give your advice and counsel. What should we do? He's saying. Now, I do love the fact that in his recounting of the story, He makes no provision for the fact that he let his concubine go out the door, let alone the old man's daughter. He says, look, they were going to kill me. And so they took my concubine and forced her. They didn't take her. You pushed her out the door. So isn't it interesting how he covers up even his own parts? He covers up even his own sin as he's recounting the story. Interesting. But what's fascinating here is as he recounts the story, okay, what's up with the chopped up dead body? Why did you send it to us? Tell us the full story. What's happening? The punchline to his story is, hey, Israel, meaning the 11 tribes, because Benjamin was not there. Hey, Israel, what should we do about it? What is your advice to me, Israel? What should we do? Did you catch the problem? You don't need their opinion. You don't need their advice of what they think you should do. God has already declared in his word. Did I write it down? Deuteronomy chapter 13. The whole second half of that chapter expressly says that if a city of Israel, of a city of their own, falls into all manner of sins, here's what to do. God's will is already declared on this matter. So to gather the people together and say, okay, what should we do about this? They're still leaving God out. How many times do we do that, guys? How many times are we faced with a situation and our only reaction is, okay, what should I do about this? Instead of saying, God, what do you want me to do about this? And they're doing it again. They're overlooking, they're completely leaving God out of the entire equation. I mean, sometimes we think God just wants to visit us at church. No, God wants to be involved in all of it. Even the bad things, the hard things, the ugly things, the good things. Bring God into it. God, what should I do? You know what would happen if the Levite would have said to the 11 tribes of Israel, if he would have said, all right, we're all here. Here's the story of exactly what happened. He should have concluded that with, therefore, Moses, the servant of the Lord, declared the mind of God in this matter, that this is what we need to do. We need to go wipe them out. That's how that story should have ended. But it didn't, because they don't care what God thinks. How sad. How sad. They didn't need their counsel. They needed God's word. Verse 8. Verse 8. And all the people, they arose as one man, and they said, we will not, any of us, go to his tent, neither will we in any way turn unto our house. But now this shall be the thing which we will do to Gibeah. We will go up by lot against them, meaning we'll throw dice and find out which of the 11 tribes of us are going to fight against the Benjamites. And verse 10, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of 1,000, and 1,000 out of 10,000, to fetch victual or food for the people, that they may do when they come to Gibeah of Benjamin, according to all the folly that they have done in Israel. So all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, knit together as one man. We'll find out later that there's actually one city that did not come and join everybody else. They're pretty confident they've got pretty much everybody from around the nation gathered together. It doesn't mean every person. It means representatives from every city have come. And so they're prepared now to take 1/10 of this 400,000 people and fight against the city, against Gibeah, and those that did this wickedness. And this is right. This is actually proper. This is literally what God called for in Deuteronomy 13, whether they knew it or not, which is what's fascinating. Did they even know that what they're starting to do here, what they're setting out to do, is actually right? Now they're going to go way beyond what God called to do in Deuteronomy 13. They're going to screw it up bad. But the general concept is sound. Verse 12. The tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribes of Benjamin, saying, what wickedness is this that is done among you? Because remember, Gibeah is a city of Benjamin. So now the 11 tribes are complaining to other people from Benjamin, saying, what have you done? Verse 13, now therefore, deliver to us these men, these children of Belial, or worthlessness, which are of Gibeah, that we may put them to death and put away this evil from Israel. But the children of Benjamin would not listen to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. So the rest of the cities of Benjamin, the rest of the people in the tribe of Benjamin, defend them. They want to protect these sinners of Gibeah. And now and why? There's no reason for this other than they're in it for themselves. They don't care what's right. They don't care what's wrong. They don't care what God's word says. They just want to protect these men that are Benjamites like they are. How sad. How sad. But notice that at least the 11 tribes of Israel, they're intending to judge only the sinners. That's their intention. That's good. That's honorable. That's the way it should be. Again, it's going to go way beyond that, though. Verse 14. But the children of Benjamin, they gathered themselves together out of the cities unto Gibeah. So now the tribe of Benjamin is getting ready for war. They went to Gibeah to go out to battle against the children of Israel. In verse 15, the children of Benjamin were numbered at that time out of the cities 26,000 men that drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, which were numbered 700 choice men. Among all this people there were 700 chosen men left-handed. Everyone could sling stones at a hair's breadth and not miss. You think David, could hit Goliath? There's 700 of them left-handed that can do it. Verse 17, the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, were numbered 400,000 men that drew sword. All these were men of war. So you got 400,000 men of these 11 tribes versus roughly 26,700 men of the tribe of Benjamin. And now in verse 18, the children of Israel rose and they went up to the house of God and they asked counsel of God. And you're like, finally, somebody cares about the Lord. Watch this. So the children of Israel went up to the house of God and they asked counsel of God and said, which of us shall go up first to battle against the children of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Now look, here's the problem. They already had the plan. They already initiated this. They already gave their counsel on how this is all going to go down. And now they come to God asking God to bless their plan. That's not what he wants. God does not want you to come to him and say, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. Would you please make it work out? He doesn't want that unless we first ask before that, okay, God, what is your will here? What do you think I should do? Should I do this or this? If he gives you guidance that says do this, or gives you a piece about doing something, now you can come to him later and say, okay, God, now I'm praying that you bless this and you help this. Guide me through it. They missed the entire first step of asking God what his will is. What should they do next? They just assumed they knew what to do. Wasn't that the exact same problem back at Ai when they first came into the land? Remember that? They conquered Jericho, and then the very next thing they went to do is they went and tried to conquer Ai, this tiny city. But they never asked God if they should do it or not. And they lost. Because they didn't know if it was God's will or not. And they certainly didn't have God's hand in that. The reminder is that even on your best day, you will fall to this world system unless you have God's blessing. When you have God's strength and you're going in God's will, then nothing can stop you. The gates of hell cannot stand against you. But even on your best, even if you have 400,000 troops against a tiny little 26,000 troops, you will fail unless you have God's blessing. That's the lesson here. And so that's what they're missing. God, we have a plan. Will you bless it? In verse 18. Now, I do want to point out that when God answers them here at the end of verse 18, it said, the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. This would be better interpreted, when you do go up to battle anytime, ever, then Judah goes up first. Because he already declared that. Even back in Judges chapter 1, the book opens up with the children of Israel saying, okay, Joshua's gone, so when we go to battle, who should go first? And God answered, Judah goes first. That's always God's answer. This isn't some new revelation from God. Judah always goes first. He said that back even in the blessings of the 12 tribes, back when Jacob bless the 12 tribes. Judah went first. There's a spiritual lesson there because Judah means praise. Always send praise first. Always turn your attention to God first before anything. That's the lesson to be learned here. He's not saying, okay, I bless your plan, send Judah. He's not saying that. The lesson is that Judah always goes first. You always need to come to God in praise first before making any decisions. And they're not doing it. They're not doing it. Verse 19. Verse 19. The children of Israel, they rose up in the morning and they encamped against Gibeah. We're going to read a long section right now. And the men of Israel, in verse 20, they went out to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel put themselves in array to fight against them at Gibeah. And the children of Benjamin came forth out of Gibeah, and they destroyed down to the ground of the inhabitants of of the Israelis that day 22,000 men. So this little tribe of Benjamin won the day. And the people, in verse 22, the people, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves and set their battle again in array in the place where they put themselves in array the first day. And the children of Israel went up and they wept before the Lord until evening. Don't you love it when people come to God crying after they've messed up? And God has compassion, but the whole time you got to know God's sitting there saying, if you'd have come to me first, you wouldn't be here crying now. In verse 23, the children of Israel, they went up and wept before the Lord until evening and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, shall I go up? Well, at least they got that right now. At least now they're asking for God's will on what to do. But why does it take us being humbled? Why does it take us messing up and feeling the pain of it before we remember, oh, I should have asked God first? So they asked God in the middle of verse 23, shall I go up again to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother? And the Lord said, go up. So he did instruct them to do it a second time. And in verse 24, the children of Israel went and came near unto the children of Benjamin the second day. Benjamin went forth against them out of Gibeah the second day and destroyed down to the ground of the children of Israel again 18,000 men, all that drew sword. Then all the children of Israel and all the people went up and came into the house of God and wept. And they sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings unto the Lord. Now they're starting to get it right. Right? How much pain do we have to suffer before we finally come to God and do it right? And in verse 27, the children of Israel inquired of the Lord. For the ark of the covenant was there in those days, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the high priest, stood before it in those days, saying, shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into thine hand. 2 waves of defeat, back-to-back days, 2 waves of defeat. Thousands dead each day. After they asked the Lord, who should go up first? We got a plan. Who should go up first? And then the second day, shall we go up? And then finally, the third day, they sit humbly weeping before the Lord, saying, God, what do we do here? Burnt offerings. What is that? Remember the picture of whole dedication. God, we've messed up. We are wholly in to listening to you now. You have got our attention. We're here now. If they could have gone into the first day the way they're going into the third day, they would have never had to have a second day, right? But it took them 3 days and the loss of all these lives before they got to that point. Wow. Why would God have them lose twice? Well, a couple of reasons. I'll give you a couple of reasons to think about, okay? Number one, because you can't remove cancer with an infected scalpel. God wants a holy people, a pure people, a people that are looking to God to know, God, what do you want? God, they should have come to God on the first day with burnt offerings, with peace offerings of fellowship. They should have come on that first day in a humble attitude, the way they did the third day. And they should have said, okay, God, Your word says. You know that's the best way to start a prayer. Did you know that? Your word says, right? That you resist the proud, but you give grace to the humble. God, I'm here humbly. Your word says, God, in Deuteronomy 13, that if a city of Israel does this wickedness, that you want us to wipe it out. God, tell us how. What do we do? He answers those prayers. And that's all they had to do. And it took them to this third day to get to that point. Wow. We think the worst enemy is the enemy without? Deal with the enemy within first. And then we'll be prepared to move out and deal with the rest. Let me get that speck out of your eye. Blah, sorry to hit you with that beam. Right? Here's another reason why God may have allowed them to lose twice before winning. Because you can do the right thing, but in the wrong way. God doesn't want their victory. He wants their hearts. And he's going to use this conflict and the civil war to get their hearts back. He wants their attention. How about this? They needed to learn to war by weeping first. The biggest battle that needs to be won is the spiritual battle first. The battle of getting ourselves purified before God, the battle of saying, God, I need you for this battle. That's the spiritual battle, and that's what needs to be won first. Do you remember back in Judges? I want to read you something from Judges chapter 3. You don't need to go there. But Judges chapter 3, remember it opened this way. Now these are the nations which the Lord left in the land for a reason, to prove Israel by them. Even as many of Israel as had not known the wars of Canaan. The wars of Canaan, when Joshua led them to battle and win all of these victories and take the whole land. Not every city, but they took the whole land. But there was cities left that they hadn't conquered that were Canaanite cities. And the reason was so that those that outlived Joshua could learn to war. In verse 2, only that the generations of the children of Israel might know to teach them to war, at the least such as before knew nothing of it. There will always be battles in your life that need to be won. And we need to learn to fight the battles the right. Joshua wept before going into battle. He prayed before going into battle. He brought himself to the Lord. Before any physical battle, he was there to win the spiritual battle. I know somebody else that did that. Jesus. What do you think the Garden of Gethsemane was? You think the cross was the battle? The cross wasn't the battle. The garden was the battle that needed won. We sung the song tonight, right? Not my will, but yours be done. When he fought that battle in the garden, the victory was won. The victory was assured. Let me say it that way. That's what assured the victory of the cross. When he conquered his last enemy, the flesh, in the garden, and he won the spiritual fight. The physical fight against the world and the world system and these people that wanted to put him on a physical cross, that was going to happen now because the battle was won in the garden. And these guys need to learn that. It took them to the third day before they learned that. Before they learned that they are an infected scalpel. And if I go out this way, it isn't going to cure the patient. I'll rip out the cancer and cause other problems. It doesn't work. All right, wow, how nasty is this stuff, right? Let's read. I want to read the whole rest of the chapter now. Verse 29, the whole way through the end. I'm just going to read right through that. It just gives the rest of the battle that happens. But there's a couple of significant things that happens. You have to hear it. So now that the Lord just guaranteed them victory in verse 28, now that they're sitting humbly, now that they're sitting ready, now that they're more purified, the Lord's going to give them victory. And that's the rest of the chapter here. Starting in verse 29 of chapter 20, Israel set their liars in wait round about Gibeah. I'll give it away at the beginning so you can understand the King's English a little better. This is just about a battle plan that you're going to read. That's what it is. It's more of a battle plan than it is a paragraph. Okay? You remember how just like they did at Ai, how they set an ambush. Liars in wait are an ambush. And then they had another group of people come up and act like they were going to attack, but then they run away so that they would chase the people out of the city to follow them. And so the liars in wait, the ambush, could get into the city. That's exactly what they're going to do here again. So in verse 29, they had liars in wait around Gibeah. And in verse 30, the children of Israel went up against the children of Benjamin on the third day and put themselves in array against Gibeah. Now, notice this, just like other times. That phrase is going to keep coming up in this section. Don't forget that. In verse 31, the children of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city, and they began to smite of the people and kill, just like other times. I'm making a point here. We'll get to it. In the highways, and of which one goeth up to the house of God, and to the other to Gibeah in the field, about 30 men of Israel. In verse 32, the children of Benjamin said, they're smitten down before us, just like the other times. But the children of Israel said, let us flee and draw them from the city to the highways. And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place, and they put themselves in array at Tamar, and the liars in wait of Israel came forth out of their places, even all of the meadows of Gibeah. And there came against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all Israel that were hiding, right? And the battle was sore, but they knew not that evil was near them. And the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed of the Benjamites that day 25,100 men, all these that drew the sword. Do you remember how many there were in Benjamin? About 26,700. Most of Benjamin just got slaughtered. And in verse 36, so the children of Benjamin saw that they were smitten for the men of Israel gave place to the Benjamites, because they trusted in the liars in wait, which they had set beside Gibeah. And in verse 37, the liars in wait hastened, and they rushed upon Gibeah, and they drew themselves along and smote all the city with the edge of the sword. Now there was an appointed sign between the men of Israel and also the men of Israel that were hiding, that they should make a great flame with smoke rise up out of the city. So once the ambush people ran into the city, they were to light it on fire, and that would tell the rest of Israel, hey, we got it. In verse 39, when the men of Israel retired in the battle, Benjamin began to smite and kill the men of Israel, about 30 people. For they said, surely they're smitten down before us, just like the first time. But when the flame began to rise up out of the city with the pillar of smoke, the Benjamites looked behind them, and behold, the flame of the city ascended up to heaven. And that's how the Benjamites knew that their city at Gibeah was taken. Verse 41, and when the men of Israel rose again, the men of Benjamin were amazed, for they saw that evil was come upon them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel unto the way of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them, and them which came out of the cities were destroyed in the midst of them. Thus they enclosed the Benjamites round about, and chased them and trod them down with ease over against Gibeah towards the east, the sun rising. And there fell of Benjamin 18,000 men, all these were men of valor. And they turned and fled towards the wilderness unto the rock of Rimmon. And they gleaned of them in the highways 5,000 men, and pursued hard after them in Gittim, and slew 2,000 there. So as they're chasing Benjamin away, that's when they're taking out chunks of them. So that number earlier we read of 25,000, that's what this is. These are, as they're chasing Benjamin away now, they're taking out thousands at a time, which will total up to that 26,000. So that all that fled. Verse 47, but 600, now there's your number you need to know in verse 47. 600 men turned and fled to the wilderness unto the rock Rimmon, and they stayed there at the rock Rimmon for 4 months. So there's only 600 Benjamites left. And they say it's the rock Rimmon, but it was really a rock fortress. It was a cave system that was elevated in this area. It's not there today, but they would have stayed in this elevated cave-like structure that would have been highly defensible. If they would have been attacked there, it would have been a very difficult battle. So Israel left these 600 Benjamites there, and they were there for 4 months. And then in verse 48, the men of Israel turned again upon the children of Benjamin and smote them with the edge of the sword, as well the men of every city as the beast and all that came to hand. Also they set on fire all the cities that they came to. So everybody that was left of Benjamin throughout the whole tribe area of Benjamin, gone. They take them out. And that part was God's will, to wipe out Gibeah. Now they went so far as to wipe out everybody in the tribe of Benjamin. All of the cities of Benjamin except for these 600. You remember in the law of Moses, it says eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? And people say, oh, that's so harsh. No, you know what it does? It limits the human need for retribution. It limits, when you punch me in the eye, I want to take off your head. And that's exactly what just happened here. The rightful thing that God would have called for from Deuteronomy 13 is wipe out the sinners from Gibeah. But yet here Israel goes so far as they wipe out all of Benjamin except for these 600 that are left. They've just created a problem for themselves that they never should have had to deal with had they just done what God said in Deuteronomy 13. But they went too far. They went beyond that. I want to point out something that I said earlier. Verse 30, verse 31, verse 32, verse 39, all throughout this whole thing that we just read, as we did at the other time, as we did before. This was the same battle plan, guys, as the last 2 times that Israel attacked Benjamin, but this time they won because they had God's blessing. It wasn't because of their strength, because of their great tactics or anything else. It was because they finally had God on their side. When will we learn that lesson? That when we accomplish great things for God, it had nothing to do with our ingenious plan that we came up with. You know? When God does a move in a church, when God brings his spirit and fills a place and brings people, and the Spirit of God is moving and people are getting saved and people are growing in grace and truth and the knowledge of the Lord, it has nothing to do with how good we are. It has to do with the fact that you have God's favor. And that's what we pray for. We say, God, let us be pure scalpels so that we can have your favor. We want to be on your side. That's all that was needed. Their battle plan was the same thing as the previous 2 days, and yet this time they win. Because now they're doing it the way God's prescribed it, and except they end up at the end of it going too far. Going too far. That's what we need, God's favor. Now, chapter 21, it's a lot shorter. It's going to finish up the whole book of Judges. We're going to read this real quick, and it makes the final lesson, because they just set up their own problem now. They just set up their own problem that was never prescribed because they took out all of Benjamin instead of just the sinners of the city of Gibeon. And so the third chapter now, chapter 21, the third lesson I want you to take away from this time period of moral decay is this. You can't set your own rules without it causing constant conflict. It's just going to happen. When you're living for your own set of rules, your set of rules is going to conflict with my set of rules, which is going to conflict with their set of rules. It's going to happen. The children of Israel, in doing what they just did, in wiping out all these Benjamites, they did what they thought was right in their own eyes. And even that is going to cause problems that they never intended. The problem now is that they have 600 men of Benjamin hiding out, and the tribe of Benjamin is going to go extinct. It's going to be wiped out. There's no women for these 600 men. And now, so they've just created a whole other problem that now they have to come up with an ingenious way for them to solve, or come to the Lord to solve. So chapter 21, let's get into it. Verse 1, now the men of Israel, they had sworn at Mizpah, that means just before they went to war, they swore, saying, there shall not any of us give our daughters unto Benjamin to marry. So before the war, when many of them were probably still thinking, we're just going to wipe out the people of Gibeah. We're not intending to wipe out everybody from Benjamin. We're only going to wipe out the people of Gibeah. They said at that time when this war is done, we're not going to have anything to do with Benjamin. We're not going to let our daughters marry into their tribe and be Benjamites. We're not going to allow it. But now here they are after the war, after they've gone too far, and they've wiped out everybody from Benjamin except 600 men, and now they have a problem. Because they've already made a vow, a commitment to God, that they will not allow their wives to marry these men. So who are these men going to marry? It's a foolish vow that they made. Did you know that almost every vow in the scripture is a foolish vow? Saul makes a vow that's foolish. Jephthah makes a vow that's foolish, saying whatever comes out of my house, I'll offer to the Lord. The men of Acts 23, when they want to kill the Apostle Paul, and they say, we will not eat or drink until the Apostle Paul is dead. They either dropped their vow or they got really skinny because they didn't catch him, and he's gone. Every vow the scripture puts out ends up being something that was of sin. In fact, didn't Jesus say that exact thing in Matthew chapter 5? Right? He says, don't swear by the temple. Don't swear by the heavens, which are God's, or the temple, or the earth. Just make then he goes on in verse 37 to say, but let your communication be yes for yes, and say no when you mean no. For whatever else you might say comes from a place of sin. I swear to God, I'll do it. Why didn't you just tell me you'd do it? Why do you have to say, I swear to God, I'll do it? You only say that because there's a reason why you won't say that you won't do it. You ever heard somebody say, I really mean it? You feel like saying, does that mean you didn't mean it the other day when you just said something without saying, I really mean it? Just let your yes be yes and let your no mean no and move on. Because if you add to it, it just indicates that there's sin in your heart trying to find a way around it. That's the idea here. There's freedom in just relying on God's will instead of my overcommitment to something. There's trust in God's will. I know God's will today. I don't know what God's will is for tomorrow for me yet. So don't overcommit to what God has. Don't be making these foolish vows like these guys did, because now they got a problem. What are they? They're going to let the tribe of Benjamin go extinct? Verse 2. The people came to the house of God, and they abode there till evening before God, and lifted up their voices and wept. And they said, O Lord God of Israel, we messed up, is what they should say. We went beyond your mandate, God. We messed up. And they say, in verse 3, why is this come to pass in Israel that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel? I'll tell you why. Because God's law said wipe out the city that sinned, don't wipe out the whole tribe. And you went beyond it. Verse 4, it came to pass the next day that the people rose up early, and they built there an altar, and they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. That's good. And verse 5, the children of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel that came not up with us before the Lord? For they had made a great oath concerning him that did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. So if there was anybody from any cities, if there was any city not represented there when they all gathered together at Mizpah, they're in violation of this agreement that they made. And so in verse 5, the children of Israel, verse 6, the children of Israel repented them for Benjamin their brother, and they said, there's one tribe cut off from Israel this day. How shall we do for wives for them that remain, seeing that we have sworn to God that we will not give them of our daughters to marry? And they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come to Mizpah to the Lord? And behold, there came none to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. So there was not a single person from the city of Jabesh Gilead that came together when they assembled together before the war. In verse 9, the people were numbered, and behold, there was none of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead there. And the congregation sent there 12,000 men of the valiantest, King James, the valiantest, and commanded them, saying, go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the children. And this is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every male and woman that has lain with a man. So if there's a married woman, she dies. But in verse 12, And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young women, virgins, that had not ever had sex by lying with a man. And they brought them to the camp of Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. And in verse 13, the whole congregation sent some to speak to the children of Benjamin that were in the rock of Rimmon, their still hideout, and to call peaceably unto them. And Benjaminites, they came again at that time, and they gave them wives which they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, and yet so they sufficed them not. Why did it not suffice them? Because there's 600 guys, okay? So the people of Israel come to these 600 Benjamites, and they're like, hey guys, look, we don't want you to die. We don't want to wipe out the tribe of Benjamin. We've brought you 400 women. Okay. And so how did they divvy them up? Which 400 of the 600 guys got these women? We don't know. But at that moment in time, the 400 men that just got themselves new brides were like, all right, good times. This is a lot better than living in a rock with 600 guys. I'm going to go home and get married. So you have 400 weddings that are going to now commence, and 400 guys are super stoked, while the other 200 are like, does that mean we're going to have to die off with no families? And they're like bummed, okay? So they had at least this situation. Isn't this so sad though? Why is Israel even having to do this? They are having to cover their sin of wiping out more than just the town of Gibeah, wiping out all of Benjamin with these 600. They're having to cover this sin, and they're having to cover the sin of making this stupid vow by slaughtering innocent people from the town of Jabesh Gilead. None of that was God's will, to wipe out this town of Jabesh Gilead just because they didn't come to the war. And so now they're covering a stupid vow with murder. It gets worse. And they think they're doing what's right. Don't ever lose sight of that. Because today, that still happens. People do all heinous evil and think that they're doing what's needed. I didn't have a choice. Right? How many times do people say, well, I didn't have a choice? You know, we make that excuse for so many things in life. Well, I don't have time to ever come to church. I don't have a choice. I have to do this and that. You have a choice. So they're covering sin with sin. Now, let's finish this off here. Chapter 21, verse 15. Let's finish this out. The people, they repented for Benjamin because that the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation, they said, well, what are we going to do for wives for them that remain, these other 200, seeing that the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? And they said, there must be an inheritance for them that escaped of Benjamin, that a tribe is not destroyed. Howbeit, we may not give them our wives to be we may not give them wives from our daughters. We have sworn, children of Israel swore, saying, cursed be the person that gives a wife to Benjamin. And then in verse 19, then they said, behold, here's a plan. We got an idea for what to do for these other 200 men. Then they said, behold, there's a feast of the Lord in Shiloh every year, which is in the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem on the south of Lebanon. Therefore, they commanded of the children of Benjamin, these 200, saying, go and hide in the bushes. Go up there to this party and hide in the vineyards. Literally, that's what it says. And in verse 21, and see and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in dances, then come you out of the vineyards and catch you away, every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh, and go back home to Benjamin. In verse 22, it shall be that when these women's fathers or their brothers come to us to complain that their daughter was just kidnapped, we will say to them, be favorable unto these guys, because it was our fault. We did not reserve to every man his wife from the war, for you did not give unto them at this time that they should be guilty. So they're going to say to the fathers or to the brothers of these 200 women that were stolen, look, you didn't break your vow because you didn't willingly give your daughters to the Benjamites. They were taken. So you're clear from your vow. Verse 23, and the children of Benjamin did so, and they took them wives according to the number of them that danced, whom they caught, and they went and returned unto their inheritance, and repaired the cities and dwelled in them. And the children of Israel departed thence unto, at that time, every man to his tribe and to his family, and they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. So the 200 men that just shortly ago, they were all bummed out thinking like, oh, the other 400 got wives and we got nothing. Now the 200, they get dancing wives. So they're even happier. so they go back home with dancing wives and they're like, hey, 400, we got dancing wives. And so they're stoked. So look, remember this. That the Bible records all this stuff doesn't mean the Bible condones it. In fact, the Bible condemns these things. It's recorded for our benefit to learn from these things. It doesn't mean that the scripture agrees with all of these things. One more verse. Don't forget this. I saved it on purpose, separate. Verse 25. In those days, you've heard this before, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. There is no better verse to end the book or the story with than that. And don't forget the two parts of that. They were doing what they thought was right, but they were doing it independent of God. Why would God end the book this way? Why would he end the book with this great sin of Benjamin and this great sin of Israel and trying to fix the problem? All of this sin that's so separate and independent from God. One of the reasons I want to tell you is that it shows that there are no good guys. When you're on your own as just a person, there's nothing good in us. This is life apart from God. This is what it looks like. When we leave God, we have no idea what good looks like. When you don't consult God first, when you don't ask God, when you're not living for God, when you're not empowered by the Spirit of God, you have no idea what good looks like. We need to rely on him for all of it. When we do our own thing, it's just only evil continually. Because your ultimate enemy is not them, it's this thing right here. Our own hearts are desperately wicked and deceitful above all things, Jeremiah tells us. Who can know it? It says. That's the ultimate enemy, is within. And this book shows us that, proves us that. Independent from God, we're helpless. Think about this. I thought about this the other day. Think about this. You know, some people have a hard time. Have you ever had a hard time thinking about the end days? And you think about how we're going to be ruled and reigned. Jesus is going to be there. He's going to be sitting as king, reigning. Now it says we're going to rule and reign with him, but he's still going to be there over us, right? You ever thought about that and thought, oh man, he's going to be right there, like ruling over us. Like, oh, that's rugged or that's hard. No, we want that. We want that because when we're left by ourselves, we're desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. I want the king right there with me all the time. I want to see him. I want to know him. I want his presence. I want to feel his presence so that I have that ultimate accountability. So do you think of freedom and you think, oh, that'd be perfect if I could just be left alone, nobody see what I'm going to do. Then I have freedom. I tell you what, all that does is lead you to sin. You want to be around the Lord. You want to be in his presence. You want to be surrounded with your brothers and sisters. That's what you want. All right, look, let's get out of here. It's late. I want to be ruled and reigned over by a perfect king, right? Without that, there's nothing left but to slide, constant moral decay and sliding down, just like they did throughout this entire book. That's exactly the idea, is that when you don't have King Jesus right there with you in your daily life, you will slide into moral decay. We're going to slide into evil. We're going to side with evil thinking that, oh, it's never going to hurt me. It will. It'll come back to bite you. We'll be trying to remove cancer in other people, and the whole time we're the ones infected. And that's not going to help them at all. We'll set our own rules, and all it's going to do is cause constant conflict with their rules. This is the state of moral decay. That's what it is. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like when we're left by ourselves. But we have a choice. We have a choice. You know, there's a great example. I don't want to say there's a great example in the scripture. There's a great example in the time period of the judges that we haven't looked at yet. That is exactly the life that we want. Did you know the next story we're going to get into, the very next book, the book of Ruth, takes place during the period of the judges. You have this wonderful story of redemption of Ruth being brought into the nation of Israel, but it's also a wonderful story of how these godly people come together in the midst of this very culture that we've been reading about. And they come together and they serve God and they live for the Lord and they listen to the Spirit and they honor God in and through this type of moral decay. You know what that tells me? It tells me we could do it too. We have the same opportunity to please God, just like Ruth and Boaz did during their time. There's hope, guys. And we have the Holy Spirit living with us to help us do it. So don't get sucked into culture. Don't get sucked into culture. There is an alternative. Live for the Lord. Look to God. Just like Ruth and Boaz, look to God and you will set the bar for generations to come. That's what they did. Think about that. Boaz and Ruth, they go on to have their son Obed, who has a son Jesse, who has a son King David. All of that started during the time period of the judges because these two people, Ruth and Boaz, decided we're not going to listen to this culture. We're going to honor God. And they have a legacy after them because of that. Overcome this culture, guys, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony. Live for the Lord. Don't let the world around you stop you. And the moment you fall and you get dirty in the junk of this world, remember that Jesus wants to wash your feet. You don't need a bath. You've already been bathed if you're a Christian. He wants to wash your feet. Come right back to him every time. And then all of this moral decay of this culture won't cling to us. And we can honor him. Right? Yeah. Amen. Hey, let's pray.